For a long time, Earth had believed in peace. After the first contact with alien life, humanity was filled with hope. They thought the galaxy would welcome them with open arms. The Galactic Council, a union of hundreds of advanced worlds, promised fairness, knowledge, and unity among all species. At first, it truly seemed like a dream come true. Earth joined the Council with trust. People worked side by side with alien scientists, shared technology, and sent trade ships to the far ends of space. Humanity adapted quickly, learning alien languages, customs, and laws. They wanted to prove that humans were no longer a danger to anyone, that they could live among the stars as equals. But as the years passed, the dream started to fade. Small things began to change, subtle rules that made life harder for humans. The Council started to place limits on what Earth could build. Human fleets were restricted. Colonies had to report everything they produced. Even simple inventions had to be approved before use. It was done politely in the name of safety, but everyone knew it was control. Still, Earth obeyed. Humans had fought enough wars among themselves. They didn't want another one, not when they had just reached the stars. The leaders of Earth kept their people calm. They believed the Council's decisions came from fear, not hatred. After all, humanity's history was violent, and perhaps others only needed time to learn they had changed. But patience can only last so long. When the new Council decree came, it hit like a thunderbolt. Without warning, Earth was accused of technological aggression. The reason was unclear. Some said it was because of advanced engines developed on Mars. Others believed it was a lie used to keep humanity weak. Whatever the truth, the punishment was swift and cruel. All trade routes connected to Earth were cut off. Ships traveling to human colonies were stopped, searched, or destroyed for security reasons. Cargo never reached its destinations. Fuel stations refused service. Even communication networks were jammed, isolating entire regions of space. Overnight, Earth went from a respected member of the galactic community to an outcast. In cities across the planet, people gathered in confusion. News channels ran constant updates, but no one understood what had truly happened. Scientists who once worked with alien partners received silence in return to their messages. The Council representatives on Earth suddenly disappeared, flown back to their homeworlds without explanation. It was as if the galaxy had decided to erase humanity altogether. For the people living in human colonies, those on distant worlds orbiting dim suns, the situation was worse. Supplies ran out. Communication stopped. Colonists waited for help that never came. They watched alien patrols orbit above their skies, enforcing blockades with no mercy. Parents whispered comforting lies to their children, saying Earth would send ships soon. But weeks passed, then months, and no help arrived. On Earth, the mood turned dark. The leaders demanded explanations. Diplomatic messages were sent to the Council, asking for meetings, for understanding, for reason. The replies were cold, written in formal language, repeating the same excuse. Humanity had violated interstellar peace treaties and must be contained until proven safe. Contained. That word spread through the human population like poison. People asked, safe from what? What did we do? But no one could answer. The Council never showed proof, never shared data, never allowed humans to defend themselves. It wasn't justice, it was domination. The media tried to keep hope alive. They showed old clips of peaceful exchanges between Earth and the Council. They spoke of trust, of patience, of diplomacy. But deep inside, everyone knew something had changed. The galaxy no longer looked at humanity as partners, but as a threat. On the orbital stations above Earth, the crews watched helplessly as alien ships patrolled near the borders of the solar system. Their presence was a warning. Stay quiet. Stay small. But humanity was never meant to stay small. In the cold silence of space, frustration grew. Earth's engineers, scientists, and workers kept asking the same question. Why are we being punished for our progress? They had worked so hard to prove that humans could be peaceful explorers. Yet now their kindness was seen as weakness, and weakness in the galaxy was dangerous. In the Council chambers far away, representatives of other species argued among themselves. Some wanted to end the punishment, warning that humans were unpredictable when cornered. Others, older and arrogant, laughed at the idea. To them, Earth was still a primitive world that had gotten lucky. They thought humans would never fight back. They believed humanity's desire for peace made them harmless. They had no idea how wrong they were. On Earth, a quiet resolve began to build. People stopped relying on the Council's promises. The governments united not under fear but under necessity. Plans were made in secret. Old factories that once produced research equipment began to switch purpose. Shipyards around Jupiter and Mars started working again, not for trade but for survival. But even then, humanity did not want war. They still hoped the Council would listen, that someone would understand the injustice being done. Messages were sent one last time asking for peace talks. No reply came. Only silence. And that silence said everything. Across the planet, families gathered around screens watching the empty sky. They didn't yet know it, but this was the calm before the storm. Among the people, there was no hate, only pain and disbelief. Farmers, teachers, miners, scientists, soldiers, all felt the same sting of betrayal. The galaxy they had once admired now looked down upon them with cold suspicion. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about dignity. Earth had done everything right. They followed every rule, kept every promise, respected every boundary, and still, they were punished. In that realization, something inside humanity began to shift. For generations, humans had been told to control their anger, to let reason guide their choices. But reason had been met with chains. Patience had been mistaken for fear. And when people lose everything they worked for, their trust, their honor, their voice, they stop asking for permission. The Council didn't see it coming. They didn't see the fire building behind Earth's calm silence. They didn't understand that every blockade, every sanction, every lost life was forging unity stronger than any treaty. And while the galaxy thought humanity was being contained, Earth was preparing, quietly, patiently. This wasn't the rage of hatred. It was the rage of survival, the kind that comes when someone tries to take away everything you've built, everything you love. In the last meeting of the Earth Council, a decision was made. No one spoke loudly. No one shouted. But every person in that room knew what was coming. The time for asking was over. The time for defending was near. Outside, the night sky shimmered with stars. Once those stars had represented peace. Now they looked like distant eyes watching, waiting to see what humanity would do next. And deep in that silence, among the scattered lights of the Milky Way, the galaxy had no idea what it had just unleashed, because when you push humanity too far, when you take their peace, their families, and their hope, what rises next isn't just anger. It's resolve, the kind of resolve that changes everything. That night, as Earth turned slowly beneath its blue skies, one truth settled in the hearts of every human being. They had trusted too much, waited too long, and been betrayed too deeply. The Council had crossed the line, and soon the galaxy would learn what happens when humanity's patience runs out. When the Council's decree spread across the galaxy, Earth went silent, not because the people agreed with it, but because no one knew what to say anymore. It felt like the universe had turned its back on them overnight. The great networks that once connected human colonies went dark one after another. At first, people thought it was just a temporary disruption. Communication lines often failed in deep space, and supply ships sometimes arrived late. But this time the silence kept growing. Entire colonies stopped sending messages. No trade routes were active. The stars that had once felt so close now seemed painfully distant. In the great communication centers of Earth, technicians worked day and night trying to re-establish contact. They sent signals, emergency beacons, and distress calls into the void. No one answered. The Council's satellites blocked their messages before they could even reach friendly worlds. It wasn't an accident. It was control. Families with loved ones on the colonies gathered in front of the news channels waiting for updates. Each day, the broadcasters promised that contact would be restored soon. Each night, they ended their reports with the same empty words: "We are still trying." The waiting became unbearable. People stopped sleeping. They sat near their screens hoping to see a familiar face again. The silence was worse than war. In war, at least, you hear the sound of resistance. But silence means you are alone. On Mars, one of the largest colonies had gone completely dark. Ships that tried to approach were warned to turn back. The Council had placed an orbital blockade around the red planet, calling it a temporary measure. Civilians trapped inside were forbidden to leave. Their signals were jammed. For months, Earth could only guess what was happening to them. The Council claimed it was for galactic safety, but to humans, it felt like imprisonment. There were rumors, whispers from smugglers who claimed to have escaped the blockades. They told stories of Council drones circling colonies, of human workers being forced to hand over their research data, and of entire settlements running out of supplies. Some of the stories were too dark to believe, so people tried not to. But deep down, they knew something terrible was happening. In the quiet corners of Earth, people began to change. The fear was still there, but something new began to take its place. Anger. The kind that burns slowly and doesn't fade. No one wanted a fight, but everyone wanted justice. In the capital cities, leaders met behind closed doors. Their discussions were long and heavy. Some wanted to wait, to keep negotiating. Others said waiting would only bring more suffering. "How long can we stay silent?" one of them asked. "How long before the Council forgets we exist?" No one could answer. Meanwhile, across the world, ordinary people started doing what governments couldn't. Engineers repaired old transmitters, hoping to send signals through hidden frequencies. Pilots with small ships tried to run the blockades to deliver food to the colonies. Some never came back. Others returned with stories of what they'd seen. Council ships surrounding human trade lanes, warning anyone who helped Earth that they'd face the same punishment. It was no longer a misunderstanding. It was control through fear. On Earth's surface, life looked normal from the outside. Cities still lit up at night, factories still produced, and people still went to work. But inside, everyone carried the same quiet dread. They avoided talking about it, but they all felt it, that something deep and irreversible had broken. The Council didn't care about the cost. They believed silence would make humans surrender. They thought fear would make them obey. But what they didn't understand was that silence can do the opposite. It doesn't just quiet the world. It teaches people to listen to their hearts. And in those hearts, something fierce was awakening. News leaked that a group of Council patrol ships had fired upon a human cargo vessel near the Vega Line. The vessel was carrying food and medicine for a stranded colony. The Council called it a misunderstanding. But when the surviving crew's message reached Earth, a broken transmission filled with static and screams, the truth could no longer be hidden. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a message. The loss hit hard. People stood in silence as the footage played. The shattered hull of the ship drifting in the dark. The last words of the pilot fading into static. No one needed to be told what it meant. The galaxy had drawn its line. That night, candlelights filled the cities of Earth. People gathered not to protest, but to mourn. Across continents, they stood under the same sky. Thousands of tiny flames glowing like fallen stars. There were no speeches, no slogans, no leaders, only silence and the quiet sound of grief turning into strength. The Council believed that by cutting off communication, they could weaken humanity's unity. But instead, they did the opposite. The more they isolated the colonies, the more Earth united. For the first time in generations, old divisions faded. Nations stopped arguing. Rival companies shared their resources. Every human, from the poorest worker to the richest official, knew that survival now depended on standing together. In the far reaches of the solar system, secret efforts began. Small research stations started working on hidden projects. Engineers built new communication networks using frequencies the Council couldn't track. The first messages slipped through the interference, reaching the stranded colonies. For the first time in months, a single word came back from one of the outposts. Alive. That one word spread across Earth like fire. It reminded people that they weren't defeated, that the Council hadn't erased them completely. There was still hope, fragile but alive. But hope was not enough. The Council's blockades were getting tighter. More colonies reported missing ships. The galaxy's media networks, controlled by the Council, started broadcasting stories painting humans as dangerous. They called Earth unpredictable, unstable, and primitive. The Council wanted to turn the rest of the galaxy against humanity, and slowly it began to work. Alien traders who once visited Earth stopped coming. The marketplaces stood empty. The once busy spaceports looked abandoned. Humanity was being erased from galactic memory, step by step, silence by silence. But humanity remembered everything. People began collecting every message, every transmission, every lost signal. They built archives of truth. They swore that one day the galaxy would know what had really happened. Then, one quiet morning, the unthinkable happened. A refugee convoy, hundreds of civilians escaping the blockade, and disappeared without a trace. Later, fragments of their ships were found drifting near a council patrol zone. The council again called it an accident, but by then, no one believed their lies. Earth's patience, already stretched thin, finally began to tear. The silence that had once felt suffocating now turned into focus. The people didn't scream or riot. They simply worked. Every factory began running around the clock. Every scientist returned to their lab. The noise of machines replaced the noise of fear. The world didn't say it out loud, but everyone understood. If the galaxy wanted silence, humanity would give them silence, but the kind that comes before a storm. And while the council looked at Earth and saw a quiet, obedient planet, they couldn't see what was happening beneath the surface. The anger wasn't wild or reckless. It was calm, sharp, and patient, because humans had learned something important. Silence can be power. It hides movement. It hides intent. It hides preparation. The council believed they had silenced humanity. But in truth, they had given Earth time. Time to think, time to unite, time to remember who they really were. And as the stars above continued to shine cold and distant, the people of Earth made a silent promise. This silence would not last forever. One day, when the time was right, the galaxy would hear humanity's voice again. And when that happened, it wouldn't be a plea. It would be a reminder that those who tried to break humanity had only made it stronger. Because deep in that endless quiet, Earth was no longer afraid. It was awake. And the day would come when that silence would be broken, not by words, but by something far louder. Something the galaxy would never forget. The silence had lasted too long. For months, Earth waited for answers that never came. Every message they sent to the council was ignored. Every plea for peace disappeared into the void. The world had grown used to being treated unfairly, but this time something felt different. This time it wasn't just about rules or politics, it was personal. Every family had lost someone. A cousin on a colony, a friend on a ship, a parent working in the outer stations, and all gone. People had stopped counting how many names were missing from the lists. There were too many. But what broke humanity's patience wasn't silence. It was what came after. One evening, a broadcast appeared suddenly across Earth's networks. The council had released a statement, a cold, emotionless message from one of their representatives. They spoke of accidents, containment zones, and peacekeeping actions. Their words sounded polished and calm, but behind them was a quiet arrogance. They claimed that the destroyed refugee convoy near Vega had been carrying unauthorized technology. They said the deaths were regrettable, but necessary. That one word struck like lightning. For hours after the announcement, the world was frozen. People sat in front of their screens, unable to move. Then the silence cracked. The pain that had been held inside for so long turned into something sharp, something fierce. Across cities and colonies, people filled the streets, not in chaos, but in unity. There were no speeches, no violence, no fire. Just millions of humans standing together, eyes raised to the stars, silently asking, "How much more will we take?" The council had crossed the line, and the whole galaxy could feel it. In the weeks that followed, the world began to change. Factories that had been idle for months roared to life. Engineers worked without rest, their hands building machines the council had once forbidden. Research centers reopened old projects locked away under alien supervision. Shipyards that used to build cargo freighters began to construct something different, something stronger. But still, no one called it war. Earth didn't want revenge. They wanted respect. They wanted to show that humanity could not be bullied into submission. Every person who picked up a tool, who welded steel, who coded a new navigation system, did it not for hatred, but for survival. Across the planet, people worked together in a way that hadn't been seen in centuries. Rival nations shared resources. Old enemies shook hands. There was no competition, no pride, only purpose. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and unstoppable. As the work continued, news from the outer colonies reached Earth, smuggled through secret channels that the Council hadn't yet discovered. Those messages spoke of hope and defiance. Small human communities cut off from supplies were building their own defenses. They were scavenging old ships, creating makeshift protection for their families. They refused to disappear quietly. When those stories reached Earth, people cried. Not out of sadness, but pride. Humanity wasn't broken. It was only beginning to wake up. Then came the moment that changed everything. A small exploration vessel named Aurora managed to break through the blockade near Neptune. Its crew, weak and starving, brought back a data recorder. Evidence from the destroyed refugee convoy. The footage showed the truth. Council warships had fired without warning. There was no accident, no misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act of destruction. The video spread faster than light. No media outlet could hide it. No council spokesperson could twist it. The world watched in silence as the truth unfolded before their eyes. In that moment, something inside humanity hardened forever. The next morning, Earth's skies filled with movement. Fleets of shuttles began transporting workers to orbital factories. Supply ships carried materials from the moon to Mars. The old shipyards around Jupiter were reactivated, producing massive hulls that stretched for miles. And while the rest of the galaxy thought humanity was breaking, it was actually becoming stronger than ever. In the Council's central chamber, confusion spread. Reports arrived that Earth's industry had increased beyond predicted limits. Council leaders dismissed them, saying humans were too emotional to organize such a response. They laughed at the idea that Earth could build anything powerful enough to threaten them. They didn't understand what humans could do when pushed. While the Council debated, Earth united. Scientists worked side by side with engineers. Students helped in research centers. Old veterans returned to training grounds to teach new generations how to survive in the stars. Even artists and musicians played their part, spreading hope through songs and stories that reminded everyone what they were fighting for. Not destruction, but dignity. And through it all, the world stayed quiet. There were no threats, no warnings, no announcements. Earth didn't need to speak. The galaxy had spoken enough lies already. Humanity would answer not with words, but with what came next. The Council began to sense something was wrong. Their patrols near the solar system started to vanish. Their drones sent back strange readings. Massive energy signatures near Mars and Jupiter. They couldn't identify them. They thought maybe they were mining stations or maybe decoys. But they weren't. They were the beginnings of something the galaxy had never seen. Ships built not for defense, but for deterrence. Ships that carried the weight of every life lost, every colony abandoned, every promise broken. Meanwhile, life on Earth was changing. The people no longer felt fear when they looked up at the stars. The Council had taken away their peace, but they had also taken away their hesitation. Now every heart on the planet beat with one shared thought: never again. Even children could sense the shift. They grew up hearing the stories of lost ships and brave colonists who refused to give up. They didn't cry when they heard about the Council anymore. They simply listened, eyes burning with quiet resolve, and in that quiet, humanity found its strength. As months passed, reports from the outer systems continued. More human settlements were pushing back against Council control. They stopped paying tribute. They refused inspections. They stood their ground. The Council tried to intimidate them, but the fear was gone. Once people have faced the worst, threats mean nothing. Back on Earth, the leaders held one final global meeting. The tone was calm, the air heavy. No one spoke about peace treaties anymore. There was only one topic: survival. A simple plan was agreed upon. Earth would no longer beg. It would prepare, not to conquer, but to make sure no one could ever hurt humanity again. The decision wasn't made in anger. It was made in clarity, because when someone takes everything from you, the only thing left to protect is your future. As the meeting ended, one of the oldest members stood up and looked out the window. The sky was clear, the stars faintly visible. "We never wanted this," he said softly, "but they left us no choice." Outside, in the cold vacuum of space, the first of the great ships came to life. It rose slowly from the shipyards orbiting Mars, a massive silhouette of steel and light. It didn't have a name yet. No flag, no emblem, just the sound of engines humming like a heartbeat. The Council didn't see it. The galaxy didn't believe it. But Earth had crossed its own line. The age of waiting was over. From this moment on, every decision would carry weight. Every word would be measured. Every action would remind the galaxy that humanity's kindness was not weakness. It was choice, and that choice had been taken from them. As the giant ship drifted silently through the stars, those who built it stood together, watching. They didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They only nodded quietly. They knew what it meant. It wasn't the beginning of war. It was the end of fear. For too long, the galaxy had mistaken Earth's patience for submission. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence can mean something else. The deep breath before a storm. And as that breath filled the lungs of an entire species, the galaxy unknowingly prepared to meet a side of humanity it had never seen before. The side that rises when every other option has been taken away. The side that fights not for power, but for the right to exist. The breaking point had come, and once crossed, there was no turning back. The galaxy had grown comfortable thinking Earth would never rise again. Months had passed since the Council's blockade, and from the outside, it looked as if humanity had finally accepted its place. Quiet, isolated, forgotten. But beneath that silence, something was moving. In the shadow of Jupiter, vast shipyards floated in the cold dark. They had once been used for trade and research, but now they served a new purpose. Thousands of workers, engineers, and builders labored tirelessly, their eyes tired but determined. No one spoke much. They didn't need to. Everyone knew what they were building. The machines that would change everything. Each piece of steel carried a story. A plate of armor forged from melted satellites. An engine built from the remains of old cargo ships. Every bolt and circuit was a reminder of why they were doing this. For the families lost, for the colonies abandoned, for the voices silenced by the Council's lies. The first of the massive ships began to take shape, enormous structures that dwarfed anything humanity had ever made. They weren't designed for trade or exploration. They were something else entirely. The workers simply called them the Guardians, though later the galaxy would know them by another name, the Dreadnoughts. The Council had never imagined humans capable of such engineering. For years, they had restricted Earth's access to advanced materials and high-tier ship components. But humanity was clever. They used what they had. They built new alloys from recycled metals, created new power systems that bypassed the need for alien technology. They didn't copy. They invented. On Earth, the mood was quiet but charged with purpose. The world no longer waited for approval or permission. Every continent, every factory, every orbital station worked together as one heartbeat. People didn't see themselves as separate nations anymore, only as one species, one family. While the Council debated policies and played politics, humanity was changing the balance of power without saying a single word. Council intelligence units started noticing strange signals coming from the solar system. Large amounts of energy were being used, and long-range scanners detected construction on a massive scale. They dismissed it as human desperation, perhaps a failed attempt to rebuild. They didn't realize what was really happening. In the shipyards, the first dreadnought powered up. The moment was silent, but those who stood there would remember it for the rest of their lives. The lights along its hull flickered to life, casting a pale blue glow across the void. It moved slowly, almost gracefully, breaking away from its dock for the first time. No one clapped or cheered. The moment was too sacred for noise. Back on Earth, the news spread like fire. People gathered outside in the night looking up at the stars. They couldn't see the ship, but they could feel it. For the first time since the blockades began, there was hope. Not the fragile kind born from wishes, but the strong kind born from work, sacrifice, and unity. The Council soon realized something was wrong. Their patrols near the edge of human space reported sightings of large vessels, ships bigger and stronger than any on record. When one of their scouts got too close, its sensors were overwhelmed by a massive energy signature. Then it vanished. At first, they thought it was an equipment failure. Then it happened again and again. The Council called emergency meetings. Reports came in from different sectors, unknown ships appearing and disappearing near human borders. But no one could confirm what they were. Every time they tried to get close, communication was lost. Within weeks, fear began to spread through the upper levels of the Council. The same people who had once mocked humanity now whispered behind closed doors. The words Earth and threat began to appear together in official documents. Still, they didn't act. They didn't believe humanity could truly challenge them. They told themselves it was a bluff. They were wrong. The dreadnoughts were not built for invasion. They were built to end fear, to make sure no one could ever hold a blade over humanity again. Each ship carried defense systems beyond anything the galaxy had seen. They were not beautiful. They were raw, angular, and strong, designed to survive, not impress. On one of the orbiting command stations, a technician stared at the growing fleet in awe. The screens before him glowed with data, ship after ship coming online, weapons offline but systems stable, engines synchronized. The scale of it was beyond imagination. The human fleet was no longer just a defense force. It was a statement. No one forgot what had started it. The destroyed refugee convoy, the silenced colonies, the arrogance of those who thought humanity would never stand up. Each dreadnought carried those memories in its steel. As the ships took formation, a quiet message was prepared. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even long. It was just a transmission meant to be heard by anyone listening across the stars. It said, "You drew first blood." That was all. No signatures. No symbols. Just the voice of truth, echoing through every council frequency. When the council leaders heard it, they froze. The message didn't come from any official communication channel. It came from deep space, from somewhere near the solar system's edge. Immediately, the council's fleets were mobilized. Dozens of ships were sent toward Earth's borders to investigate. They expected resistance, maybe a small human outpost, maybe a desperate skirmish. What they found was something else entirely. When the first council fleet entered human space, they were met with silence. No defenses activated, no ships appeared. The stars looked calm, empty. They thought maybe the message had been a bluff after all. Then their sensors detected movement. Slow, deliberate movement. Out of the darkness, a single dreadnought emerged. Its massive hull reflected the light of the nearest star, its outline sharp against the void. The council fleet tried to scan it, but their systems couldn't keep up. The readings made no sense. The ship's energy output was too high, its armor too thick. Still, the dreadnought did not attack. It simply moved forward, cutting through the void like a silent warning. The council commander tried to hail it. There was no response. Then, without firing a single shot, the dreadnought activated a pulse. Every council ship within range lost power instantly. Engines, weapons, communication, everything. The fleet drifted helplessly, and then just as silently, the dreadnought turned away and vanished back into the dark. The message was clear. From that day, no council ship dared to enter human space uninvited. The galaxy, which once saw Earth as weak and naive, now watched in uneasy silence. For the first time, humanity wasn't begging for peace. They were enforcing it. Back on Earth, people didn't celebrate. They didn't shout or dance in the streets. They simply carried on with their work. Because they knew this wasn't victory. It was only balance and something that should have existed all along. And yet across the stars the story began to spread. Traders whispered about ships made of shadow and light. Soldiers spoke of human fleets that appeared out of nowhere and vanished before scanners could track them. Some called them ghosts. Others called them angels. But among the council's inner circles there was only fear. The council leaders gathered in private chambers, arguing about what to do. Some wanted to open peace talks. Others demanded war. But deep down, even they knew the truth. The galaxy had changed forever. Humanity was no longer a voice to be silenced. It was a force to be respected, and through it all Earth remained quiet. No speeches, no demands, no arrogance. Just a simple message to the galaxy. One they didn't need to say out loud anymore. Respect earns peace. Betrayal earns consequence. As the new fleet continued to grow, the people of Earth looked up at the night sky and saw not fear, but pride. The same stars that once seemed cold and distant now looked closer, as if they finally belonged to them. They had not sought war, but they had found strength. They had not asked for power, but they had earned it. The galaxy had taken everything from them, and in doing so, had given them something greater: unity. And as the dreadnoughts patrolled silently through the dark, guarding the fragile peace they had built, every human knew deep down that the fight wasn't for revenge or conquest. It was for survival. It was for every life that had been lost to arrogance and cruelty. It was for the right to stand tall beneath the same stars as everyone else. The galaxy had finally seen the strength behind humanity's silence, and from that day on, the stars would never be silent again. The message that humanity had sent, just 3 words, "You drew first blood," had echoed across the stars like thunder. Even though no ships attacked and no wars began, the galaxy felt different. Worlds that had once laughed at the idea of humans standing up now whispered in fear. Traders spoke of huge black ships moving through space with silent power. Colonies close to human borders began to see strange lights in the dark. Ships that didn't answer calls but never attacked either. They simply appeared, watched, and vanished again. It was as if the stars themselves had started watching back. The council met every day trying to understand what was happening. For years they had controlled everything: trade, travel, and technology. But now their systems were being disrupted. Human-built satellites were jamming long-range signals. Trade routes near Earth became unsafe for council ships. At first, the council thought they could intimidate humanity again. They gathered fleets near the border, but this time the humans didn't react. They didn't send warnings or demands. They didn't even respond to threats. The silence scared the council more than any weapon could. Reports started flooding in from across the galaxy. An entire council patrol vanished near the edge of human space. No wreckage, no distress call, nothing. A few days later, one of their communication stations received an unmarked transmission. It contained only a single line: "Do not test our silence." The council panicked. For decades, they had painted Earth as reckless and dangerous, a world too emotional, too unpredictable. But the humans they faced now were different: calm, strategic, united. It wasn't rage driving them anymore. It was purpose. In a quiet room on one of the council's massive stations, a group of delegates sat in stunned silence. The images on the screen before them showed a new kind of fleet, human ships unlike anything in the council's database. They moved with perfect coordination, without waste or hesitation. How did they build this? One of them finally whispered. No one had an answer. The truth was, humanity had never needed the council's help to grow. For centuries, they had learned to survive with limited resources, harsh environments, and endless setbacks. They were builders by nature, dreamers who turned obstacles into tools. When the council tried to hold them back, they didn't stop. They simply changed direction. While others relied on ancient alien technology, humans invented new ones. While the council fought over rules, humans worked together in silence, and now, the results of that unity were floating in the stars and unstoppable, untouchable, undeniable, across the galaxy. Smaller species who had also suffered under the council's arrogance began to whisper about Earth. Some even began to hope. They remembered how humanity had once sent aid to dying worlds, how they had welcomed refugees when others turned them away. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy had a choice: continue following the council's fear, or believe in the quiet strength of humanity. On Earth, life moved forward. People worked, studied, built, and dreamed. They didn't think of themselves as conquerors. They simply wanted to protect what they had earned. Yet even they could feel it: a change in the air, a shift in how the stars looked at them. The leaders of Earth met often, not to plan attacks, but to plan peace. They knew revenge would destroy everything they had built. The goal was never destruction, it was respect. Still, they couldn't ignore the danger. The council was unpredictable, cornered by its own pride. Humanity knew that a desperate enemy could be more dangerous than an angry one. So, they prepared quietly. The dreadnoughts continued to grow in number, but so did the smaller ships: scouts, protectors, carriers. Every ship had one purpose: to ensure that never again would humanity kneel. In the far reaches of the Milky Way, rumors spread like wildfire. On the outer colonies, where the council's influence was weaker, people began raising the human flag beside their own. It wasn't about allegiance. It was about courage. To them, that flag meant hope. The idea that someone, somewhere, was finally standing up to the power that had ruled for too long. But not everyone welcomed the change. The council's inner circle was furious. They accused one another of failure, betrayal, and weakness. Some demanded immediate retaliation. Others begged for peace talks. The meetings became chaos, and amid that chaos, something happened that no one expected. A group of independent council scientists secretly contacted Earth. They claimed to have proof that the Council had lied for decades, manipulating information, covering up disasters, and blaming humanity for things they never did. They wanted to reveal the truth, but they needed protection. Human leaders listened carefully. They didn't fully trust the scientists, but they knew this could change everything. Within weeks, the scientists disappeared. No one knew what happened to them. But shortly after, encrypted data began spreading across the galaxy. Data that exposed the Council's crimes. The files showed how they had staged incidents, silenced witnesses, and exploited weaker worlds. Everywhere, people started to question the Council's authority. Protests broke out on several member planets. Some even declared independence. The galaxy was unraveling, and the silence of Earth had become the loudest voice in the stars. In one of the Council's final emergency sessions, their supreme speaker stood before the assembly, his voice trembling. "We created this," he said quietly. "We built our empire on fear, and now fear has turned against us." But even then, pride wouldn't let them admit defeat. They sent a fleet, the largest in their history, toward human space. It was meant to be a show of power, a final warning. When the fleet reached the outer edge of the solar system, they found nothing. Just the cold silence of deep space. No ships, no signals, no resistance. And then, slowly, the darkness began to move. One by one, dreadnoughts appeared, surrounding the fleet from all sides. Their massive forms blocked out the stars, each one glowing faintly with blue energy. The Council fleet tried to lock weapons, but their systems began to fail, one after another. No shots were fired. No voices spoke. Then a single human transmission came through. "We are not your enemies, but we will never be your victims again." The message ended, and the dreadnoughts drifted aside, allowing the fleet to leave unharmed. The Council ships turned back, shaken and silent. When they returned, the galaxy already knew what had happened. The Council's last attempt to intimidate Earth had failed completely. The myth of their power was broken. Planets that once obeyed them without question began to refuse orders. Trade agreements collapsed. Armies disbanded, and in the middle of it all, humanity didn't move a finger. They didn't invade, didn't conquer, didn't gloat. They simply watched the galaxy change on its own. On Earth, the people didn't feel joy or pride. What they felt was something deeper. Peace mixed with sadness. They knew it didn't have to come to this. If the Council had shown kindness instead of greed, respect instead of arrogance, none of it would have happened, but history had chosen its path. In the quiet that followed, a human pilot looked out at the stars from his ship's bridge. The galaxy seemed endless, full of both danger and promise. He thought of the generations before him, who had dreamed of peace and unity, and realized they had finally earned it. Not through domination, but through endurance. Humanity had not sought revenge. They had sought dignity, and though the Council's empire was collapsing, something new was beginning. A balance, fragile but real. Worlds that had once been enemies were now reaching out to one another, uncertain but hopeful. For the first time in a long while, the galaxy began to feel alive again, and in that moment the stars no longer looked cold, they looked welcoming. As if they had been waiting all along for someone brave enough to stand up and remind them what freedom really meant. Humanity's rage had burned bright once, but now it had cooled into something far stronger: resolve. They had proven that silence could speak louder than war. That strength didn't always need violence, and that unity was the greatest weapon of all. The Council had crossed the line, and in doing so they had awoken a sleeping giant, one that didn't roar, but simply stood tall. The galaxy would never forget that lesson. And as Earth's ships continued to patrol the edges of known space, their lights flickering softly against the darkness, one truth echoed quietly across the stars. Humanity had not just survived, they had earned their place among the stars. The galaxy had never been silent for so long, and now it would never forget Earth again. The Council, once arrogant and untouchable, had been forced to see the truth. Humanity had not only survived their attempts to suppress it, but had grown stronger in every way imaginable. Their patience, endurance, and unity had created something no one in the galaxy had expected. A force not born of hatred, but of resolve. Earth's dreadnoughts patrolled the borders of the solar system quietly, their engines humming softly against the void. Smaller fleets moved through nearby colonies, protecting them, not conquering them. Humanity had not sought revenge. Their goal had always been simple: security, dignity, and respect. The Council sent envoys again, hoping for negotiations, hoping to restore control. But this time their words were met with calm, unwavering firmness. The humans didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They simply stated what everyone already knew. We will never be your victims again. We will not allow injustice to thrive. The galaxy began to take notice. Planets that had once feared Earth began to reach out. Merchants, scientists, and explorers offered help. Worlds that had been oppressed by the Council for decades now whispered about alliance. For the first time, the galaxy's future felt open, uncertain, but full of possibility. Humanity, however, didn't rush to seize power. They moved with careful intention. Each action was measured, designed to restore balance rather than dominate. The dreadnoughts were not weapons of war. They were symbols, a reminder that peace demanded strength, and that respect could not be demanded without consequence. The first act of reconciliation came quietly. Supplies and medical aid were sent to the colonies that had suffered under the Council's blockades. Systems left abandoned for months were restored. Communication networks were reopened. The people of Earth wanted to heal, not punish. When the aid reached the colonies, the response was overwhelming. Children ran to greet the supply ships, waving flags painted by parents who had waited months without word from home. Scientists and engineers worked tirelessly alongside the arriving teams, rebuilding habitats and infrastructure. Human empathy, once considered a weakness by the Council, became their greatest strength. But the Council had not yet accepted defeat. Its leaders were divided, some refusing to acknowledge the human achievement, others quietly alarmed at the balance of power shifting. They tried one final display of intimidation, a fleet assembled in massive formation ready to march into human space. The humans did not panic. They didn't launch attacks or raise shields. They simply positioned their fleet strategically, their dreadnoughts forming lines of quiet authority. And then, without a single shot fired, the Council fleet faltered. Systems overloaded from the human interference in their sensors. Engines stuttered, and communications went dark. The Council realized too late that they had underestimated humanity completely. But this time, humanity did not exploit weakness. They gave the Council a choice: retreat and negotiate honestly, or continue a path that no longer offered control or fear. The galaxy watched as humanity held firm, calm, and principled. It was a moment unlike any before. No one in the galaxy had ever seen a civilization rise without revenge, without anger, without destruction, yet achieve the same effect. Humans proved that strength could be shown through restraint, that justice could be demanded without bloodshed. Across the stars, smaller species began to reach out. They shared technology, resources, and knowledge. Some offered to join in creating a new form of galactic governance, one that didn't rely on fear, intimidation, or lies. The human example had inspired hope where the Council had only bred despair. On Earth, people worked quietly to coordinate these efforts. Leaders met not to plan conquest, but to plan support networks. Scientists and engineers collaborated with alien allies, developing systems that could protect colonies from future threats. The focus was survival, prosperity, and fairness, a galaxy where no one could ever be silenced as humanity had been. The Council, meanwhile, was shrinking in influence. Worlds that once feared them no longer obeyed blindly. Their propaganda had failed. Their lies were exposed. And slowly, the Council itself began to reform, forced to negotiate in ways they had never imagined. Humanity watched carefully, ensuring that the galaxy's next steps were guided by integrity. They did not seek control. They sought balance. And with every step, the galaxy began to understand that peace was not simply the absence of war. It was the presence of justice and respect. The human fleets returned home one by one, dreadnoughts glowing faintly in orbit not as trophies, but as symbols of endurance and vigilance. The colonies they had protected were thriving again. Families were reunited. Communities rebuilt. Life, fragile and precious, had been preserved. In the cities of Earth, people walked the streets without fear. Children played under the blue skies, unaware of the battles that had never needed to be fought. Scientists walked through open labs, engineers in workshops, and teachers in classrooms. Humanity's focus had returned to creation, to learning, and to building a future worth protecting. And yet, The stars still whispered of the courage that had been shown. Humans had not shouted. They had not lashed out. They had waited, endured, and then acted with intelligence, strategy, and care. The galaxy would never underestimate them again. The last council envoy left Earth quietly, carrying the truth with them. A civilization that could endure betrayal, isolation, and injustice and rise stronger without hate was not one to challenge lightly. Humanity had rewritten the rules of engagement, showing that true strength lay in unity, patience, and moral resolve. Back on Earth, as the sun rose over oceans and forests, people felt something deeper than victory. They felt dignity restored. They had been pushed to the edge, betrayed, and silenced. And yet they had returned not with rage, but with light, the light of survival, of hope, and of the courage to stand for what is right. For generations, humans would tell the story of the silence, the months when the galaxy had tried to erase them. They would speak of the patience that became power, of the unity that became armor, and of the resolve that became a symbol for all worlds. And the stars themselves seemed to acknowledge it. They were no longer distant, cold, and unreachable. They felt alive, as if welcoming humanity back into the larger story of the universe, not as a primitive world, but as a wise, strong, and principled one. Humanity had faced betrayal. Humanity had faced fear. Humanity had faced isolation, and humanity had endured. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Silence could no longer be mistaken for weakness. Peace required respect. Strength demanded integrity. Earth's people knew this, and quietly, without fanfare, they returned to their lives, not as conquerors, but as guardians. Guardians of their own dignity, and guardians of a galaxy finally reminded that justice, unity, and courage could not be silenced. And somewhere in the distant stars, civilizations that had once feared humanity now whispered their gratitude, their hope, and their own desire to live with honor. For the first time, the galaxy felt balance, and humanity at last could look up at the night sky and see not threats, not enemies, but possibilities. They had survived the silence, they had risen from it, and in doing so, they had shown the universe what it truly meant to be human.